What's the biggest mistake your boss ever made? My boss Richard lost it when he caught me helping my coworker fix a client's order. This is exactly why productivity is down, he shouted. Everyone's wasting time helping each other. He called a mandatory meeting and announced that helping coworkers was now forbidden. From now on, everyone handles their own work exclusively, and I'll write up anyone I catch helping someone else, he said, glaring at me. I asked what if someone needed critical information only one person had, but Richard said that was their problem for not being prepared. The rest of the team exchanged nervous looks. The next morning, Richard came to my desk, panicked because his presentation was missing half the data, and only I had access to those files. Send me everything immediately, he demanded, but I reminded him that would be helping a coworker. His face went red as he stood in front of 20 executives with a half-empty PowerPoint, stammering about technical difficulties, while they whispered about whether he was drunk or just incompetent. That disaster meant the executives wanted daily updates from him, but Richard didn't know how to pull the numbers himself, because he'd always made us do it. When he asked for help, we all pointed to his no-helping policy, so he spent 12 hours trying to figure out Excel formulas that we could have shown him in 5 minutes. He sent the executives complete garbage data that showed we'd somehow sold negative products, and they started questioning if he understood basic math. To prove he didn't need anyone's help, Richard actually fired his assistant in front of everyone, saying she was part of the productivity problem. Within 2 days, he was drowning because he didn't know his own passwords, couldn't find any files, and had no idea when his meetings were. He showed up to the wrong conference room 3 times in one day, while important clients waited elsewhere, and everyone started whispering that he was losing it. Our biggest client called furious about a massive order problem that required information from 3 different people to fix. We all sat at our desks, listening to Richard get screamed at on speakerphone while he tried to solve it alone, running between computers, trying to piece together information that we could have given him instantly. The client fired us on the spot, and Richard had to explain to his boss why he'd lost their biggest account over something that should have taken 2 minutes to resolve. The office coffee machine broke, and normally someone would just fix it, but helping maintain office equipment counted as helping coworkers. Richard, addicted to caffeine and unable to function without coffee, had a visible meltdown in the break room at 10 a.m., actually shaking while trying to figure out why the machine was beeping. A visiting investor watched our boss nearly cry over a coffee machine and asked if everything was okay with leadership. Our department was supposed to host the company holiday party, but organizing it required collaboration. Since no one could help each other, Richard had to plan everything alone, resulting in him forgetting to order food, booking a venue for the wrong date, and sending invitations with the wrong address. 300 people showed up to an empty parking lot, while Richard stood in an empty restaurant across town, and the CEO called him personally to ask if he was sabotaging the company on purpose. Richard's computer crashed after he clicked a sketchy email, and normally someone on our team would help him recover his files since we all knew the workarounds. But helping was forbidden, so he had to work from his phone for a week, typing reports with his thumbs and holding his tiny screen up during video calls like a teenager. His boss asked why a grown man was running meetings from his phone, and Richard's explanation made him sound completely unhinged. The final straw came when Richard threw out his back moving boxes because the mailroom wouldn't help him carry them to his office. He literally couldn't stand up straight, but still had to give a presentation to investors, hunched over at a 90-degree angle, sweating through his suit from pain. One investor actually asked if he needed medical attention, while Richard insisted everything was fine, his face white as paper, trembling from the effort of standing. By Friday, he was begging us to forget the policy, tears actually streaming down his face as he sat on the floor of his office because his back hurt too much to reach his chair, and no one would help him up. "Please," he whispered. "The board is coming Monday, and I need help with everything or I'm finished." We all stood in his doorway looking down at him sprawled on the carpet, and I said, "But helping you would be a write-up offense." But I didn't realize that I'd just pushed him too far. Richard's face went from white to deep purple in seconds. His whole body started shaking on the floor. He slammed his fist into the carpet hard enough to make us all step back. The scream that came out of him was nothing like normal anger. It was raw and broken and desperate. The security guard came running down the hallway, his keys jingling as he pushed through our group. He took one look at Richard writhing on the floor and asked what happened. I explained that our boss needed medical help, but company policy said we couldn't assist co-workers. The guard stared at me like I'd lost my mind. Richard kept trying to push himself up on his elbows, but his back would spasm, and he'd collapse again. The guard pulled out his phone and dialed 911, while Richard shouted that he didn't need an ambulance. He managed to grab the edge of his desk drawer and tried pulling himself up. His fingers slipped, and he fell back down with this awful sob that made everyone look away. The guard told the dispatcher we had a man with a back injury who couldn't move. Richard kept insisting he was fine between gasps of pain. He started crawling toward his desk chair, dragging himself across the carpet with his forearms. His tie got caught under his body and started choking him. Nobody moved to help because of his own stupid rule. The guard had to kneel down and loosen Richard's tie himself, while Richard kept saying the board meeting was Monday. 2 paramedics showed up with a stretcher about 10 minutes later. They asked Richard basic questions, but he just kept repeating that he had presentations to prepare. One paramedic checked his back, while the other one prepared the stretcher. They had to physically lift him, because he couldn't help them at all. Richard grabbed the doorframe as they carried him out, begging us to send him the quarterly reports. The entire office stood in the hallway watching our boss get wheeled away on a stretcher. Stefan Medina turned to me and said, this was going to get interesting. Within an hour, Boyd McNeil showed up on our floor looking confused and angry. He walked straight to Richard's office and saw the mess on the floor where Richard had been lying. Boyd asked what exactly had happened to put a department head in the hospital. Stefan and I showed him the printed memo about the no-helping policy. We pulled up emails where Richard threatened write-ups for any assistance between co-workers. Boyd's face changed as he read through everything we'd documented over the past week. His confusion turned into something closer to rage when he saw the timeline of disasters. He grabbed Richard's desk phone and called an emergency meeting with every department head in the building. While Boyd made calls, Joanne Holt from HR arrived with a laptop and started setting up in the conference room. She called us in one by one to explain how the policy had affected our work. Each person told their own story about the chaos Richard had created. The receptionist explained how she couldn't transfer calls for anyone because that counted as helping. The janitor said he couldn't empty anyone's trash, but his own according to Richard's rules. Stefan showed Joanne emails where Richard refused to let team members share basic information. Sanjay Pacheco brought his laptop to show Joanne something even worse than we'd realized. Richard had tried merging customer databases by himself the night before his breakdown. He'd corrupted 3 years of sales data trying to combine files without understanding the system. Sanjay showed her error logs that went on for pages. The damage would take weeks to repair if it was even possible. We'd lost customer contact information, order histories, and payment records for thousands of accounts. Joanne's face got paler with each screen Sanjay showed her. She started typing notes so fast her fingers were blurring across the keyboard. Monday morning came, and Richard's chair sat empty while Boyd stood at the front of the conference room. He announced that Richard was still in the hospital with severe muscle spasms and couldn't sit up. Boyd said he'd be running the board meeting himself and needed our help immediately. For the first time in over a week, he gave us permission to work together normally. The whole team jumped into action like we'd been holding our breath underwater. Stefan divided up tasks, and people started sharing files and information instantly. We built presentation slides while someone else pulled financial data. People helped each other with formulas and formatting without looking over their shoulders. In 3 hours, we created a comprehensive presentation with accurate data and professional graphics. It would have taken Richard 3 days of fumbling around to make something half as good. The board meeting started at 2 o'clock with 12 members sitting around the executive conference table. Philip Guerra led the questions, asking Boyd why our department had lost 40% productivity in 1 week. Boyd had to explain Richard's no-helping policy while the board members looked at each other in disbelief. Guerra pulled up emails from 3 major clients who had terminated their contracts with us. He wanted to know how one department could lose millions in revenue in 5 business days. Boyd showed them our documentation of every incident, from the coffee machine to the corrupted database. The board members kept interrupting to ask if this was really true. One member asked if Richard had suffered some kind of mental breakdown before implementing the policy. Boyd said Richard had seemed completely rational when he announced it, just angry about productivity. Guerra asked how nobody in management had noticed this disaster sooner. Boyd admitted that Richard had been hiding problems by making his team cover for him constantly. The phone speaker in the middle of the conference table started ringing, and Boyd hit the button to connect the call. Kayla O'Brien's voice filled the room, and she didn't wait for greetings before launching into her concerns about our department's recent performance. She said her company had watched 3 major orders get completely messed up in the past week, and they were done being patient. Guerra asked her to explain what happened, and Kayla described how Richard had refused to let our team share basic shipping information that would have prevented a $100,000 mistake. She said if this kind of chaos continued for even 1 more day, they would cancel their contract and find a new supplier immediately. The board members started writing notes furiously, while Kayla listed every single problem Richard had caused her company, from missed deadlines to wrong products being shipped because he wouldn't let departments talk to each other. When she hung up, the room went quiet for about 10 seconds before Guerra stood up and called for an immediate vote on launching a formal investigation into Richard's management. Every hand went up around the table, and Brooke Lofton, our legal counsel, started explaining the potential problems the company was facing. She said Richard's no-helping policy had created what could legally be considered a hostile work environment, and several employees might have grounds for lawsuits. The board members looked even more worried as Brooke pulled out employment law books and showed them cases where companies had been sued for similar management failures. Guerra told Boyd to suspend Richard immediately pending the investigation results, and Boyd nodded while typing something on his phone. The meeting went on for another hour, with board members asking for every email, memo, and document related to Richard's policy. Tuesday morning, I got to work early and found an email from Joanne already waiting in my inbox. She had sent it to the entire department, announcing that the no-helping policy was reversed effective immediately, and everyone should return to normal collaborative work practices. The email also said Richard would not be returning to the office while the investigation was ongoing, and we should direct any questions to Stefan Medina. Stefan walked into the office carrying boxes of donuts and told everyone to grab breakfast while he explained the new plan. He said Boyd had appointed him as interim department head, and his first priority was fixing the damage Richard had caused. Stefan divided us into teams and assigned each group specific tasks to recover lost data and reach out to angry clients. He put Sanjay in charge of the technical recovery, since he knew the systems better than anyone else. Within an hour, we had 3 different groups working on database restoration, client outreach, and catching up on the backlog of work that had piled up during Richard's disaster week. Stefan moved into Richard's old office but left the door open all the time, telling anyone who walked by that they could interrupt him whenever they needed help. Around lunchtime, Stefan got a call from someone at the hospital and put it on speaker, so we could all hear. The doctor said Richard had tried to check himself out against medical advice on Monday morning, insisting he had to get to a board meeting. When the nurses tried to stop him, Richard had gotten aggressive and started yelling that his career was destroyed. They had to call security and eventually sedate him when he tried to pull out his IV and leave in his hospital gown. The doctor said Richard kept mumbling about presentations and Excel formulas, even while the sedatives were kicking in. Wednesday afternoon, a woman showed up at reception asking for Stefan and introducing herself as Liliana Crowder. Stefan explained that she was our new administrative assistant, replacing the one Richard had fired in his attempt to prove he didn't need help. Liliana's eyes got wider and wider as we gave her a tour of the chaos Richard had left behind. She opened the supply closet and found stacks of moldy pizza boxes from the failed holiday party that Richard had hidden instead of throwing away. The filing cabinets were completely random because Richard had tried to reorganize them himself without understanding the system. Liliana asked why there were coffee stains all over the carpet in Richard's office, and we explained about his meltdown when the coffee machine broke. She started making lists of everything that needed to be fixed, shaking her head at each new disaster we showed her. By Thursday, the investigation team had interviewed everyone in the department and started putting together their report. The lead investigator told Stefan that they'd discovered Richard had been hiding his incompetence for at least 6 months, maybe longer. Every time he made a mistake, he'd blame it on someone else or make his team stay late to fix it without telling anyone. The investigator showed us emails where Richard had taken credit for presentations we'd created and reports we'd written. They found performance reviews where Richard had given us low scores for the exact work he'd been claiming as his own achievements. Without our constant help covering for him, Richard's complete lack of basic job skills had become impossible to hide anymore. Friday morning, Stefan called a meeting to share some good news for once. 3 of the clients who had fired us during Richard's disaster week had agreed to give us a trial period to win back their business. Stefan assigned specific team members to each account and told us to do whatever it took to prove we could handle their needs properly. He encouraged everyone to work together as much as possible and said anyone caught not helping a coworker would have to buy lunch for the entire team. We spent the rest of the day calling clients, fixing orders, and actually enjoying our work for the first time in months. Around 3 o'clock, the reception desk called to say Richard's wife was on the phone, asking if someone could pack up his personal belongings. I volunteered to do it since I figured I owed him that much after everything that had happened. His office was exactly how he'd left it when the paramedics took him away, with papers scattered everywhere and his computer still showing error messages. I found dozens of self-help books about leadership stuffed in his desk drawers with the spines not even cracked open. There were titles like Managing Without Fear and The Power of Delegation that he'd obviously bought but never actually read. I also found printouts of articles about how to use Excel with basic formulas circled in red pen like he'd been trying to teach himself in secret. His coffee mug still had dried coffee in the bottom from his last day, and his motivational posters about teamwork seemed pretty ironic now. Monday morning, we had our first real team meeting with Stefan running things properly. He'd spent the weekend going through all the numbers and wanted to show us exactly how much damage Richard's no-helping policy had caused. Stefan pulled up a spreadsheet showing lost clients, delayed orders, corrupted data recovery costs, and potential legal fees. When he hit the total button, the number came out to just over $2 million in 1 week. Boyd had joined our meeting to see the numbers himself and actually choked on his coffee when Stefan showed the final amount. Boyd wiped coffee off his shirt, while Stefan clicked through more slides showing exactly how each of Richard's decisions had cost us money. Joanne walked in carrying a stack of papers and announced that starting tomorrow, every manager in the company except Stefan would have to attend mandatory collaboration training. The other department heads started complaining that Richard had ruined it for everyone, But Joanne said the board wasn't taking any chances after seeing what one bad manager could do. She passed around the training schedule, and I saw it was a 3-day workshop about fostering teamwork and recognizing when employees need help. Stefan asked if he could access Richard's old emails to understand what client relationships needed repair, and that's when things got really interesting. Sanjay had admin access to the email server and started pulling up Richard's correspondence from the past few years. We gathered around his computer as he opened folder after folder of messages Richard had sent to executives. There was my quarterly report with my name deleted and Richard's signature added at the bottom. Sanjay found at least 50 examples where Richard had forwarded our work to upper management, always removing our names and adding notes like he'd personally compiled the data. One email showed Richard claiming credit for a client recovery plan that Stefan had spent 2 weeks developing. The worst part was seeing performance reviews where Richard marked us down for lacking initiative on the exact same projects he was taking credit for. Stefan printed everything and added it to the investigation file that kept growing thicker by the hour. The janitor knocked on our conference room door and asked if we'd heard about Richard calling him from the hospital. He told us Richard had called the building at 3 in the morning, begging him to come fix the coffee machine because he needed it working before the board meeting. The janitor had reminded him that helping would violate the no helping policy, and Richard had actually started crying on the phone. The janitor felt bad, but said he wasn't going to risk his job after what happened to Richard's assistant. Stefan spent the rest of the afternoon reviewing our personnel files and realized Richard had been blocking promotions for years. He called me into his office and showed me emails where Richard had told executives I wasn't ready for advancement, even though my work was exceeding all metrics. Stefan said he was fixing that immediately and promoted me to senior analyst with a $20,000 raise. He did the same for 4 other team members who Richard had been holding back, and suddenly everyone was getting the titles and salaries they'd deserved for years. My phone rang the next morning, and it was a headhunter saying Richard had listed me as a reference for a management position at another company. I asked if she knew about the no-helping policy that had cost us millions, and she went quiet for a moment before saying she'd remove my name from his application. She thanked me for the information and said she'd be having a very different conversation with Richard than she'd planned. Sanjay had been working non-stop with 3 other team members to recover the corrupted data from Richard's failed database merge. What Richard had made impossible by working alone took our team just 2 days of collaborative effort to fix. We managed to restore about 90% of the customer records, and Sanjay even found backups Richard didn't know existed because he'd never asked anyone about our backup protocols. The whole team celebrated when the last file was recovered, and Stefan bought pizza for everyone to mark our first real success since Richard left. Thursday morning, our entire company received an email from Richard's personal account with the subject line, "The truth about my termination." He wrote 3 pages blaming us for sabotaging him and claimed we'd conspired to make him look incompetent by refusing to help. He called out several people by name, including me, saying we'd deliberately let him fail out of jealousy. Within an hour, Brooke from legal sent Richard a cease and desist letter that she copied to the entire company, warning him that any further defamatory communications would result in legal action. She also reminded him that his own signature was on the no-helping policy memo that had caused all the problems. The board meeting minutes from Monday got circulated to all department heads, and Stefan shared them with our team. The board had implemented new oversight measures requiring all managers to undergo quarterly reviews by their teams. They also created a new policy requiring 2 signatures on any departmental rule changes, specifically to prevent another Richard situation. Every department would now have an employee representative who could raise concerns directly to the board if a manager started acting like Richard. Boyd stopped by our department to check our progress and joked that our productivity metrics for the first month without Richard showed a 40% increase. He said Richard's no-helping policy had accidentally proved how toxic he'd been by showing how much better we performed without him. The numbers didn't lie because we were closing more deals, handling more clients, and making fewer errors than we had in the past 2 years. Boyd said we were now the top-performing department in the company, which would have been impossible under Richard's management. Liliana had been organizing Richard's old files and called Stefan over to look at something suspicious she'd found. There were receipts for expensive dinners, golf outings, and even a weekend spa trip that Richard had charged to company accounts. She showed us credit card statements where Richard had been billing personal expenses as client entertainment for months. Stefan immediately took everything to Brooke, who said the investigation would now expand to include potential embezzlement charges. The very next morning, Stefan called us all into the break room and started what he called daily team huddles, where everyone would share their biggest problems, and we'd all pitch in solutions together. People who hadn't spoken up in meetings for years were suddenly throwing out ideas, and within 3 days, we'd fixed 6 major issues that had been stuck for months. Stefan walked around with a notepad, asking each person what they needed help with, and then paired people up to tackle problems together. The change was so fast that clients started commenting on how different we sounded on calls. 2 weeks later, Boyd walked into our department carrying a sheet cake that said, "Helping Others Since 2024, in bright blue frosting, and announced Stefan was officially our new permanent department head. Everyone clapped, and Stefan actually got choked up for a second before grabbing a corner piece and making jokes about finally getting Richard's parking spot. We ate cake at our desks, while Stefan moved his stuff into Richard's old office and took down all those stupid motivational posters. That same afternoon, Stefan assigned teams of 3 to each lost client account and told us to do whatever it took to win them back. I worked with Sanjay and another guy to put together a presentation showing how we'd fixed every single problem that had happened under Richard's watch. The first client agreed to a trial period after just 1 meeting, and the second client signed back on completely within a week. The third client's rep told us they were watching our progress and would decide by quarter end, but the fact they were even talking to us was huge. Stefan found out from the first client that Richard had been telling them we were incompetent for months, which explained why they'd been so quick to leave. Thursday morning, Brooke from legal forwarded us an email from some lawyer representing Richard who was demanding 6 months severance pay, plus a recommendation letter. Boyd replied within an hour saying Richard should count himself lucky they weren't pressing charges for the embezzlement and to never contact the company again. The lawyer wrote back threatening wrongful termination, but Brooke shut that down with copies of Richard's own policy memos and the expense fraud documentation. We all read the emails out loud in the break room, and someone actually printed out Richard's no-helping policy to frame as a reminder of what not to do. The coffee machine started making weird noises during our afternoon meeting, and before anyone could even report it, 5 people jumped up to check it out. Sanjay figured out the water line was clogged while I cleaned the filter, and someone else grabbed the manual from the supply closet. We had fresh coffee brewing in under 10 minutes, and everyone was laughing about how Richard had literally cried over the same problem. Stefan watched us work together and said this was exactly what a team should look like. The next week, Joanne sent out a company-wide email announcing a new anonymous reporting system for toxic management behaviors. She included a whole section about recognizing warning signs like managers who discourage collaboration or create hostile work environments. At the bottom, she thanked our department for inspiring the change, though she didn't mention Richard by name. The form had checkboxes for different red flags, and one of them was literally, "prohibits employees from helping each other," which made us all crack up. People from other departments started stopping by to ask what really happened with Richard, since the official story was pretty vague. The company newsletter came out with a feature story about our department's transformation, calling us the comeback story of the year. They used phrases like previous challenges and leadership transition, but never said Richard's name once. The article included our new productivity numbers, which were honestly insane because we'd improved literally every metric in just 1 month. They interviewed Stefan, who talked about the power of collaboration and mutual support without ever directly mentioning what had happened before. While organizing Richard's old files, Stefan discovered emails going back 3 years where Richard had been telling upper management that none of us were ready for promotion. He'd been blocking every single advancement opportunity, claiming we needed more development while taking credit for all our work. Stefan immediately submitted promotion paperwork for 6 people who should have moved up years ago and fought to get us back pay for the roles we'd actually been doing. I got promoted to senior analyst with a 20% raise retroactive 6 months, and 4 other people got similar deals. The receptionist pulled me aside one morning and whispered that Richard had shown up in the lobby last Friday, demanding to speak with Boyd. She said he looked terrible, hadn't shaved in days, and kept insisting he had important information about company theft that Boyd needed to hear. Security had to physically escort him out when he refused to leave, and he'd been shouting about conspiracies and frame jobs the whole way to the parking lot. The guard told her Richard had been banned from the building, and his key card was permanently deactivated. By the end of the quarter, our numbers were so good that Boyd called a special meeting just to congratulate us. We'd beaten every target, won back 2 major clients, and had the highest customer satisfaction scores in 5 years. Boyd announced bonuses for our entire team and said our department would be getting new computers and an extra headcount for next quarter. He showed a slide comparing our current performance to the previous quarter under Richard, and the difference was so dramatic, people gasped. Revenue was up 42%, errors were down 60%, and employee satisfaction had literally doubled according to the anonymous surveys. Boyd said we were proof that good leadership and teamwork could turn any situation around and that he'd be using our story in his presentations to the board. Stefan stood up and said the credit belonged to all of us for sticking together through the chaos, and everyone started clapping. The next week I was checking LinkedIn during lunch when I saw Richard had updated his profile to say he was a management consultant, specializing in productivity optimization, which made me nearly spit out my coffee. I screenshotted it and sent it to the team chat, where everyone started adding laughing emojis, and Stefan said Richard couldn't optimize his way out of a paper bag. The profile claimed he had 20 years of experience transforming teams and maximizing efficiency, which was technically true if you counted destroying our department as transformation. A few days later, Stefan got an email from a business school professor asking if we'd be willing to share our experience with Richard's no-helping policy for a leadership case study. The professor had heard about our situation through industry contacts and wanted to use it as an example of what not to do in management classes. Stefan called us all into the conference room and asked if we were comfortable participating, since it meant our story would be taught to business students for years. Everyone agreed immediately, because we wanted other companies to learn from our nightmare, and Stefan scheduled a call with the professor for the following week. That same afternoon, Kayla from our third lost client called Stefan directly to discuss potentially returning to our services. She'd been watching our improvements over the past few months and said working with us now felt like dealing with a completely different company compared to the chaos under Richard. Stefan put together a presentation showing our new processes and collaboration methods, and within 2 hours, Kayla signed a 3-year contract worth more than we'd had before. The whole team celebrated with cake in the break room, and Stefan made sure to email Boyd about winning back all 3 major clients we'd lost during Richard's meltdown. About 6 months after Richard left, Sanjay came into work looking shocked and told us his neighbor had seen Richard working as a cashier at the grocery store near the highway. Apparently, Richard was wearing the store uniform and bagging groceries while his neighbor was checking out, and Richard pretended not to recognize him, even though they'd talked at company events before. Word had spread throughout our industry about his spectacular failure, and no company would touch him for any management position after hearing about the no-helping policy disaster. The company announced the winners of the annual collaboration award, and our entire department won, with Boyd personally coming to our floor to present the trophy. He gave a speech about how we'd maintained professionalism during an impossible situation and transformed ourselves into the most collaborative team in the company. The trophy was this huge crystal thing that Stefan placed right where Richard's old motivational posters used to hang on the wall. Boyd shook everyone's hand and said we were proof that good people could overcome bad management, and thanked us for not letting Richard's incompetence destroy the department. Joanne from HR stopped by the next day to tell us something interesting about Richard's latest move. He'd tried to file a wrongful termination lawsuit claiming he was fired without cause, but his own no-helping policy memo became the main evidence against him. His lawyer had reviewed the case and immediately dropped it when he saw the documentation of Richard banning employees from basic collaboration and the resulting $1 million losses. The lawyer apparently told Richard he was lucky the company wasn't suing him for gross negligence and advised him to move on quietly. Stefan had been working on something special for weeks and finally unveiled his help board in the main hallway. It was this big whiteboard divided into sections where people could post requests for assistance and others could sign up to help with specific tasks or share expertise. Within the first day, it was covered with sticky notes, and people from other departments started asking if they could create their own version. Stefan's simple idea spread through the entire building, and by month's end, every floor had a help board that people checked multiple times a day. The company executives noticed how popular the help boards became and announced they were implementing 360-degree reviews where employees would evaluate their managers, not just the other way around. They specifically mentioned that Richard's disaster had taught them that top-down evaluation wasn't enough to catch problem managers before they caused damage. Every manager now had to get feedback from their team members twice a year, and the scores would affect their bonuses and promotion opportunities. During a lunch break, someone showed me Richard's new blog called Truth About Corporate Conspiracy, where he claimed to be a victim of employee sabotage. The blog had maybe 3 followers, and 2 of them had the same last name as Richard, so they were probably relatives feeling sorry for him. His posts rambled about how his innovative management strategies were undermined by lazy workers and how the corporate world couldn't handle revolutionary thinkers like himself. The writing was so delusional that it actually made me feel bad for him until I remembered all the chaos he'd caused and the clients we'd almost lost forever. A full year after Richard's departure, our department got the company newsletter featuring our satisfaction scores, which were now the highest in the entire company. New employees joining our team couldn't believe the story when we explained we once had a policy that literally banned helping coworkers, and they always asked if we were exaggerating. We'd show them Richard's original memo that Stefan had framed as a reminder of how bad things could get with the wrong leadership, and they'd stare at it in disbelief. The scores showed 98% employee satisfaction and 95% client satisfaction, which were both company records that other departments started studying to understand our success. Boyd stood up at the quarterly meeting 2 weeks later and pointed to our department's chart on the big screen behind him. He tapped the graph showing our improvement and told 300 employees that Richard's disaster was actually the best thing that happened to the company because it forced us to fix broken systems we'd ignored for years. The other department heads shifted in their seats when Boyd said Richard's failure taught more about good management than any training seminar ever could. He announced new policies requiring all managers to spend 1 day each month doing their team's actual work and helping with basic tasks. Stefan came to my desk the next week with this huge calendar marked with a red circle around the date Richard collapsed on his office floor. He'd gotten approval to make it an official company event called Collaboration Day, where every department would spend the whole day working together on projects and helping other teams with their biggest problems. People started signing up immediately to lead different sessions, and within 3 days, we had 40 volunteers offering to teach skills to other departments. The first Collaboration Day happened a month later, with everyone wearing matching shirts that said, "Helping makes us stronger," and spending 8 hours solving problems that had been stuck for months. Marketing helped accounting automate their reports, while IT showed sales how to use the database properly, and suddenly everyone was fixing things that had seemed impossible before. Stefan got called into Boyd's office on a Tuesday morning and came back an hour later with this huge smile on his face. He gathered everyone around and announced he'd been promoted to Vice President of Operations and would be overseeing 3 departments starting next month. Then he turned to me and said, Boyd wanted to see me immediately about taking over as the new department head. I walked into Boyd's office, and he handed me the official paperwork, making me the department head with a 40% raise and my own assistant. My hands shook a little as I signed the papers, and Boyd said my first job was creating new policies that would prevent another Richard situation from ever happening again. I spent that afternoon writing my first official policy, which stated that helping coworkers wasn't just allowed, but would be part of everyone's performance review, with bonuses for people who helped the most. The next morning, maintenance showed up at Richard's old office with toolboxes and started taking down the walls to create an open workspace. Stefan had gotten approval to turn it into a collaboration area where teams could gather to solve problems together without the barriers of individual offices. We hung a huge sign that said, "Helping Zone," right where Richard's no helping memo used to be posted on the wall. Everyone who worked in the space started signing their names on the wall with permanent marker as a promise to always help their co-workers no matter what. By the end of the week, we had over 200 signatures covering the entire wall, and people from other floors started coming down just to add their names to our growing commitment to collaboration. I really appreciate you sticking with me through all the questions and curiosity today. It means a lot to share these moments with you. If you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.